Hey, have you ever wondered what really lies behind the lens of a glamorous photographer? In the town of Oak Haven, Julian Thorne was once seen as the gateway that helped young girls touch their dreams of fame. Who would have thought that behind the enticing offer of a top-tier detective-themed photo shoot was a deadly trap already set? The metallic sound of the old prison cell lock still echoes in the file. Even though that moment has receded decades into the past, it was not a loud noise, just a dry, decisive sound, like the way Julian Thorne's life began to veer in a different direction. The desk lamp in the meeting room cast light down onto the yellowed pages, revealing his name underlined multiple times in black ink. Everything, when looked back upon, did not begin with a murder, but with small signs overlooked too early, and it was precisely those signs that shaped this entire case. Julian Thorne was born in Brighton, Empire State, a town not too noisy, where families knew each other across generations, and according to the records, from his teenage years, the subject began to exhibit abnormal behaviors, not through direct violence, but through deviations in how he approached others. Scattered reflections from the school and community that were noted but not connected into a clear warning. When he left Brighton, the next trace appeared in Riverdale, Centennial State, where the first confirmed assault took place. The method not complicated but showing calculation, luring women into dark alleys, taking advantage of dim light and silence to approach, a behavior not impulsive but prepared. And in the initial victim's statement, it was recorded that I only heard footsteps behind me. Then he started talking very normally. That statement cut off in the report by the prolonged silence that followed, as if even the note-taker had to pause. How long had he stood there before choosing the moment to approach? The incident in Riverdale was not the only one, but it was the first to reveal a behavioral pattern. And from that pattern, later investigators were able to trace back his past, because at that time, everything was still seen as isolated incidents. After Riverdale, Julian Thorne continued to move, and it was this very movement that made tracking difficult, until he was arrested after attempting to assault a woman in her own home in Blackwood, a clear escalation in boldness, because the victim's private space meant he had crossed the final safety boundary. In the file, there is a short victim statement. I thought he was just someone needing help. This seemingly harmless statement, when read again in the dim meeting room, leaves a long silence, because it shows how the subject exploited basic human trust. Did the victim notice anything unusual? Or did it all happen too quickly in her mind? This time, the legal system held him, and Julian Thorne was convicted, imprisoned at Riverdale Prison, where initial psychological evaluations were conducted, describing an individual skilled at concealing, adapting to the prison environment, not causing trouble, not standing out, the type of subject easily underestimated if only judged by appearances. During his years at Riverdale Prison, staff noted his compliance with rules, participation in assigned programs, and because of this, he was later transferred to a dignity restoration facility with the goal of reintegration, a decision correct by procedure, but raising many questions in retrospect. Or was it just a fleeting shadow of rehabilitation, enough to convince on paper? There were no records of violence during this time, only dry reports of stable progress, adaptability, the subject expressing a desire to start life anew. The phrase quoted verbatim from an evaluation. When Julian Thorne was released, he did not return to Brighton or Riverdale, but moved to Oak Haven, a new location where no one knew his past, and there, he began a new life under the cover of an electronics repair technician, a job that allowed access to others' private spaces under legitimate pretense, a detail that later, when connected to prior events, made many pause to think, how many years have passed? What have we learned from that career choice? In the archived documents, There is a small note from the facility supervisor. Subject shows dexterity, patience, suitable for technical work. This observation in itself not wrong, but in the overall context, carrying a different meaning. Oak Haven, with its quiet streets and golden evening lights, became where Julian Thorne blended into daily life, and if viewed only from the outside, no one could connect that polite electronics repairman to the thick files stored in investigative agency archives. What is notable is that throughout the process of moving, arrest, imprisonment, and reintegration, no detail went beyond what was recorded. No event was concealed, only a lack of connection between the pieces, and it was that lack of connection that created the gap for the subject to continue existing in society. Have we placed too much trust in each individual step of the process while forgetting to look at the whole picture? When rereading the entire first part of this case, from Brighton to Riverdale, from Blackwood to Oak Haven, the smell of old paper, the slow turning of the ceiling fan in the meeting room, and the dim light all contribute to a chilling feeling not from violence, but from the repetition of unconnected warnings. The conclusion of this part is not a period, but a prolonged comma, reminding that every file needs to be read as a continuous flow, because the greatest lesson from this case lies in early identification and proper connection of signs. Before a new cover can form, the dark-covered notebook lies open on the table, its edges worn and carrying the smell of old dust, like forgotten evidence in the pitch-black meeting room. The old air conditioner hums steadily, drowning out the slow breathing of the person sitting across from the file. The desk lamp shines diagonally, creating a narrow beam of light that falls exactly on the neat handwriting inside. There is no blood, no cries for help, only written words and prolonged silence, and it is from those silent details that Julian Thorne's plan in Oak Haven emerges. He established a method of approaching victims by posing as a photographer for detective magazines, a cover that sounded legitimate, professional enough not to raise suspicion from the first contact, and in the file it is clearly recorded that the subject actively invested, purchasing professional photography equipment, not makeshift items, from cameras, lighting to backdrops, then renting a small apartment in central Oak Haven as a studio, a location carefully chosen for convenience and privacy. When stepping into that space, according to one candidate's account, everything looked very serious, just like a real studio. The statement quoted verbatim in the report, and when reread, one cannot help but notice how the exterior was built to conceal the intent within. Julian Thorne sought young models eager for advancement, targeting those just entering the industry. Through agencies where candidate lists were always open and competition made them willing to listen to any promise, and in the collected documents, there are recorded exchanges where he spoke of opportunities to appear in magazines, of career stepping stones, phrases attractive enough to blur initial warning signs. How long did he stand there before making the first request? In this plan, the most notable detail is not the approach, but the persuasion, because Julian Thorne required the victims to believe that photos in a bound and gag state were mandatory requests from editors, a reason repeated multiple times in statements, and one victim recalled him saying very calmly, almost scripted, that this is the concept they want. If you don't do it, you'll lose the opportunity. This statement underlined in the file. Or was it just a shadow of coercion cloaked in professional language? There are no records of the subject using direct violence in this data section. Only psychological manipulation, reliance on false authority, and the candidate's lack of experience. And that very fact made detection harder in the early stage, because everything was presented as a professional agreement. In the small apartment in central Oak Haven, photography lights were turned on and off according to appointments, the smell of plastic and metal from new equipment mingling with the closed air, and outside, life went on normally, no one knowing that inside was part of a carefully prepared plan. Did she notice anything unusual when hearing that request? Julian Thorne did not stop at individual approaches. He also meticulously noted a list of potential candidates in a personal notebook. The evidence now lying before me, with each name, each brief note, showing systematic target selection, and those even lines reflect a habit, not impulsive action. In the review process, we found no signs of randomness in victim selection. Everything followed clear criteria. Young, inexperienced, seeking opportunities, and easily persuaded by professional promises. How many people read the same invitation and thought it was luck? When connecting the pieces, from purchasing equipment, renting the studio, approaching through agencies, making requests under editorial pretense, to noting the list, the picture emerges without needing any additional details to understand the subject's level of calculation. In the dim meeting room, only the soft sound of turning pages, each turn sweeping the desk lamplight across the lines, and the silence between file entries becomes heavier than words. Was it precisely the reasonable exterior that obscured the inner danger? This part of the case does not end with a climax, but with clear recognition of a behavioral pattern, where professional cover is used as an access tool, and the lesson drawn is not from a single detail, but from seeing the entire chain of actions. The chilling conclusion of this file section reminds us that in investigation, preparation and systematism are often more dangerous than impulsive acts, and carefully reading seemingly legitimate signs is sometimes the only boundary. Between early warning and late consequences, the only sound lingering in the file is the very soft click of the apartment door closing, as if not wanting anyone outside to hear. The desk lamp in the meeting room shines directly on the first note page, where the timestamp is circled in black ink. There are no noisy images, only a sequence of actions recorded in cold words. Everything began with a normal job advertisement, ending with a car leaving Oak Haven, and between those 2 points is the entire third part of the case. Julian Thorne contacted Clara Bennett, a 19-year-old freelance model, through that very advertisement, an approach no different from dozens of other offers she had received. And in the file, no initial warning signs are recorded beyond the deliberate familiarity created. He invited Clara Bennett to his apartment for the first photo shoot, a location prepared in advance, a space called a studio, where photography lights and the plastic smell of equipment mingled in the closed air, making everything appear legitimate and arranged. In the account, there is a verbatim quote that the shoot had the theme kidnapping victim, this phrase appearing multiple times in the documents, like a key unlocking the entire subsequent sequence. Did she notice anything unusual when hearing that theme? Julian Thorne persuaded the victim to let him tie her hands and feet to serve the aforementioned theme, and the notable point is that the persuasion was not rushed, not immediately forced, but based on professional language, on the belief that this was a work requirement, part of the shoot. The sound of rope rubbing against the chair surface, as noted, very faint, almost drowned in the air conditioner and operating electronic equipment, and the silence in the apartment at that moment became a covering factor for the ongoing behavior. How long did he stand there before revealing his true intent? After gaining control of the victim, Julian Thorne confessed his real intent and threatened her with a handgun. This detail clearly recorded in the file as a shift from cover to direct control, needing no further explanation. There is no excessive description of the victim's reaction, only confirmation that the threat existed and was enough to completely change the situation. Or was it just in that moment that every assumption about a photo shoot collapsed? In the dim meeting room, when reading this section, one can hear one's own breathing, slow and heavy, because the lines need no emphasis yet still carry their own weight. Julian Thorne then forced Clara Bennett into his personal car to move out of the Oak Haven area, an action recorded as continuous, not impulsive, because the vehicle was ready and the exit route pre-planned. The sound of the car door closing, inferred from the event sequence, is the sound marking the end of the approach phase and the start of another, though the file in this part stops exactly at that moment. Did she know what she was about to face as the car drove away? There is no information in this data section beyond what is stated, and that very limitation forces us to focus on the sequence, on how each step was executed with cold logic. In the meeting room, the smell of old paper and faded ink mingle. Each page turn a soft rustle, reminding that this is not a story retold for emotion, but a record for analysis. How many seemingly legitimate details contributed to this moment when connecting the job advertisement, invitation to the apartment, shoot theme, persuasion, handgun and car. The behavioral chain emerges clearly, needing no further speculation, no imagination beyond the file. The third part of this case, when read continuously, shows the fragile boundary between professional consent and control created through deception, and the lesson lies in early recognition of small but decisive shifts. In conclusion, these dry lines remind that in investigation, closely tracking behavioral sequence is more important than any emotion, because missing just one step can obscure the entire picture. The desert wind blowing through Mojave Plains leaves a dry, rasping sound like sandpaper scraping metal, and that is the last sound remembered in this file section. The desk lamp shines down on the document page, where the timestamp is stamped in faded ink. There are no living witnesses standing there, only dry lines describing a completed sequence of actions. Sand, empty space, and isolation are the elements repeated. From the moment the car stopped, everything is recorded as a cold process. Julian Thorne brought Clara Bennett to a remote location in Mojave Plains, choosing the space based on distance and inaccessibility. And in the file, there is a short note that the area has no regular residential activity. Words enough to understand why it was selected. The desert air carries the smell of hot sand and dry dust, silence stretching so far that every movement becomes clearer in investigative reasoning. There, the subject committed sexual assault multiple times on the victim while keeping her bound. The detail recorded briefly, without description, only confirming state and repetition of the act, because for the file, the event and context matter, not sensation. How long did he stand there, between those acts, in the desert emptiness and absolute silence? Afterward, Julian Thorne took a series of realistic photos of Clara Bennett's panic state, and the word realistic appears in the documents as a forensic marker, because these photos were not created to artisticize, but to capture the victim's state, and that very fact turns them into heavy evidence. In one note section, there is a short quote. Photos show victim bound, clear expression of fear, words without embellishment, but enough to recreate the subject's purpose. Or was it just a shadow of control frozen in the frame? After completing the photography, Julian Thorne killed the victim by strangulation. This detail confirmed in the file as cause of death, without excessive description, only noting method and result, because any speculation beyond that is unnecessary for case resolution. The Mojave Plains space at this point is described with simple physical elements: sand, wind, natural light, and absence of people, all contributing to blurring the line between action and concealment. Did she know when the final moment would come, or did everything happen in the numbness of fear? The subject buried the victim's body in a shallow pit under the sand and cleaned the scene, a step taken to erase surface traces. And in the report there is an assessment that the shallow burial shows haste, but still enough for temporary cover. These words reflecting the subject's pragmatic approach. No ritual, no hesitation recorded, only sequence. Dig, place, cover, and leave. How many signs were obscured by sand from the start? After completion, Julian Thorne returned to Oak Haven, this movement recorded as a return to daily life, and the next stop in the behavioral chain is the darkroom in his apartment. There, the subject developed the photos taken, a technical action, but carrying clear evidentiary meaning, because the developing process shows active preservation and control of images of the occurred act. In the file, there is a quote from the search report, "Darkroom used regularly. Equipment still damp." These words evoking the smell of chemicals and closed space, where light was controlled as tightly as what was captured on film. How many times were those photos reviewed before discovery? In the dim meeting room, when reading this section, the page-turning sound comes slowly, each time thickening the silence, because no additional details are needed to understand the coldness of the action chain. Mojave Plains was not a place with witnesses, but became a fixed point on the investigative map, because there, the acts were completed and transformed into evidence. 28 years, or just a few file pages, who remembers exactly the moment the sand was first disturbed. This part of the case, when read continuously, does not tell an emotional story, but presents an evidence chain, location, act, images, concealment, and return. And from that chain, the investigative lesson emerges clearly. In conclusion, these lines remind that the coldness in the file is not to dehumanize, but to ensure each act is recorded accurately, because only that accuracy allows truth to outlast the silence of sand. The steam from cooling coffee rises from the chipped porcelain mug, leaving a faint bitter smell mixed in the suburban morning air. The spoon clinking softly against the cup rim rings briefly, then fades, like a small period in the lengthening chain of actions, where the file shifts to a new phase. 6 months have passed since the first case. Enough for dust to cover many people's memories, but not enough to erase the subject's habits. And there, the name Eleanor Vance appears for the first time. 6 months after the first case, Julian Thorne began seeking his next target, Eleanor Vance, a continuation not noisy, not impulsive, but recorded as the next step in the established behavioral sequence. He used the false identity of freelance photographer to approach Eleanor Vance at a suburban cafe, a location chosen for its neutrality and sense of safety it provided, where people are used to short work meetings and do not ask too many questions. In the file there is a quoted statement. He said very little, mostly about work. The statement cut off in the report, as if even the note-taker recognized the suspicious smoothness of that contact. How long did he stand there before entering the cafe, observing, choosing the right seat? Julian Thorne offered high pay to persuade the victim to participate in an outdoor photo shoot, a detail emphasized in the documents because it shows how the subject used economic benefit to offset potential risks, and that pay was described as above average, enough to make the offer attractive. There are no records of suspicion from the start, only acceptance built on professional basis, and the cafe's silence, with the humming espresso machine, contributed to making everything seem normal. Or was it just a shadow of vigilance blurred? Afterward, the subject drove Eleanor Vance to the hilly area east of Oak Haven under the reason of finding the best natural light, an explanation technical and familiar to those who have done outdoor shoots. And in the file, there is a note that this route has little traffic, open scenery, but isolated, the sound of tires rolling steadily on the road. Her investigative reasoning became the background for this movement, and light gradually changed as the car left residential areas, from streetlights to natural light, weaker and thinner. Did Eleanor Vance recognize what that shift meant? In the car, while the victim was trying to change clothes to prepare for the shoot, Julian Thorne began using rope to restrain the victim. The detail clearly recorded regarding timing and method, without excessive description, only confirming the restraint occurred right in the confined vehicle space. In one report section, there is a brief sentence, "Rope used suddenly," dry words, but enough to show the abrupt shift from professional agreement to control. How long did that moment last in the victim's perception? As the car continued rolling, the interior space, per recent description, became stifling, smell of clothing fabric, plastic interior mingling, and silence broken only by movements necessary for driving. How many warning signals appeared along that road but were not recognized in time? In the dim meeting room, when reading this section, the desk lamp reflects off the worn paper edges, and the page-turning sound comes slowly, like a rhythm reminding that this is not a story retold with emotion, but a record for analysis. The file does not go beyond the restraint moment in the car, and this very stop forces the reader to focus on the chain of approach, persuasion, movement, and control. Each step with reason, each step executed within what is recorded. Does the repetition of the pattern make us so familiar that we become negligent? The fifth part of the case, when placed beside previous parts, shows the 6-month gap not as interruption, but as preparation and selection time, and the lesson lies in early recognition of similarities in how the subject built trust before breaking it. In conclusion, these cold lines emphasize that in investigation, tracking method repetition is more important than waiting for consequences, because that very method is the clearest trace of approaching danger. The whistling wind through Dust Bowl Canyon sounds like a long cut in the air, dry and empty. The desk lamp shines down on the file page where the name Eleanor Vance is mentioned for the last time. There is no traffic noise, no signs of activity, only rock, sand, and complete isolation. In the pitch-black meeting room, the smell of old paper and faded ink blend together, making each line appear slowly, and it is in that remote place that the behavioral chain is repeated according to an established pattern. Julian Thorne brought Eleanor Vance to the area named Dust Bowl Canyon, a location recorded as far from residential areas and hard to access. This choice not random but fitting the method that had appeared before. Where silence becomes a necessary condition, the space there is described with minimal elements, rock walls, narrow crevices, natural light cut by the terrain, and constant wind covering all other sounds. The subject committed similar acts as with the first victim, including binding, photographing, and sexual assault. These details recorded briefly in the file, without deep description, only confirming repetition in sequence and method, because for investigation, that similarity carries decisive meaning. How long did he stand there before starting, when everything around was only rock and wind? In one quoted statement section, there is the sentence, "She talked a lot, begging to be released." The words interrupted in the report, as if the note-taker also paused the pen for a beat. And from that, it is confirmed that Eleanor Vance tried to persuade the subject to release her, using words as the last means. Julian Thorne ignored all pleas. This detail recorded not with emotion, but by behavioral comparison, showing complete disconnection between the begging and the subject's response. Or was it just a shadow of negotiation that never existed? In Dust Bowl Canyon, the silence becomes thicker after each action, and light changes slowly with the sun's position, creating long shadows on the rock surface. Afterward, Julian Thorne killed the victim and left the body in a rock crevice instead of careful burial, a detail emphasized in the file because it differs from previous behavior, showing change in scene handling. No sandpit, no careful covering, just placing the body in a rock crevice where natural terrain is used as temporary concealment. Did she know why this time he did not conceal as thoroughly as before? Leaving the body in the rock crevice is analyzed in the report as a quick decision, possibly influenced by time or terrain. But the file does not speculate beyond facts, only noting the difference and its consequences. The subject then took Eleanor Vance's jewelry as a type of personal trophy, this detail appearing in the related evidence list, and the term trophy used in the documents, a descriptive term for keeping the victim's personal items. In a short note, there is the line, "Jewelry not left at the scene." Simple words, but carrying meaning about motive and choice. How many things were taken away at once, and how many things left in that crevice? When reading here, in the meeting room, only the slow page turning sound remains. Each time the desk lamp sweeping across lines, checked many times. There are no direct witnesses at Dust Bowl Canyon, only reasoning based on traces and sequence. And that very fact makes the file speak for the scene. Does method repetition make the subject more complacent? The difference in body disposal is seen as an important indicator because it shows behavior not completely rigid but adaptable to circumstances, a factor to note in prediction and prevention. In the closed space of the meeting room, the smell of paper dust and ceiling fan create a steady background rhythm, contrasting with the chaos that occurred out there. The sixth part of the case, when read continuously, does not retell a tragedy with emotion, but presents an evidence chain about repetition, ignoring pleas, change in concealment, and keeping trophies, all recorded to serve understanding the subject's behavior. 28 years, or just a few pages, who remembers exactly the moment that crevice was chosen. In conclusion, these cold lines remind that in investigation, recognizing both similarities and differences in behavior is vital, because those small differences are often the most important clues leading to truth. The neon lights of the bookstore had just dimmed when Sophia Morales closed the book. Looking up upon hearing a softly introducing voice interrupted by the page-turning sound, the business card placed on the pale wooden table reflects cold light, just enough to read the self-claim as representative of a large advertising company. The smell of new paper and cold coffee mix in the air, the air conditioner humming prolonged like a taut string. "I think you are very suitable for this project," the statement recorded in the file. No exclamation mark, no emotion. Outside, the sky darkens gradually, and in my meeting room many years later, only the dry file turning sound remains. Sophia Morales, a 24-year-old model, became Julian Thorne's third target according to the sequence he always maintained, approaching in public places, using legitimate cover, speaking little but enough to build trust. Statements record that he introduced himself as advertising representative without naming the company, but emphasizing long-term photo contract like a honed bait. The bookstore silent enough to hear the breathing of the two people facing each other. Fluorescent light making everyone's skin pale, and Sophia nodded after a few minutes of brief exchange, a nod recorded without additional emotional note. The dinner took place afterward according to the invitation, the table with knife-clinking plates, hot food smell spreading, and in the file only one quoted sentence remains. "We discussed the contract, dry and short, no description." She agreed to let Julian Thorne drive her home. This decision confirmed by her final statement to friends, and from the moment the car door closed, everything shifted to a different rhythm. Engine running steadily, street lights streaking across the windshield into long light trails. The road turned in the opposite direction, toward the desert. No signs, no sound except tires rubbing the road. And in that moment, Sophia realized the abnormality. She looked outside, prolonged silence. Then the first question appears in the file like a blank. When did she realize? Julian Thorne did not explain, hands steady on the wheel, eyes not leaving the front, and the air in the car thickened plastic and leather seat smell mixing with cold sweat. When Sophia tried to open the door, the central lock sounded a dry click, and immediately after was violence to restrain, described in one short line. No excess details, as if the note-taker also avoided looking longer than necessary. She tried to jump from the car when speed decreased, body leaning toward the door, desert wind whipping in, sand crunching under tires, but the holding force pulled back, and the door slammed again, sound echoing in ears like a period. How long did he hold her that way? In a few seconds or longer. I reread each line, seeing more blanks than words, seeing how Julian Thorne always chose open but isolated spaces, where screams do not travel far, where light is just enough to see fear in the rearview mirror. Wrong way. A verbatim quoted statement, unclear whose, cut off by wind, or just the recorder's memory. The desert opens ahead, pitch black sky, and in the car, Sophia's breathing hurried, mixing with the steady engine sound, creating a cold background noise. I wonder, in the moment realizing the door could not open, what did she think? Or was her mind blank like the straight road? Julian Thorne used violence to restrain when she realized the abnormality. That is the only line describing the action. No adjectives, no metaphors, just the event. Violence here needs no more words, because its placement next to previous everyday details is enough to chill the reader. From quiet bookstore to car speeding into desert in one segment, no soft bridge. Sometimes I pause, listening again to the air conditioner in the meeting room, thinking about the silence in the car when streetlights disappeared. How long did that silence last? In statements, no one mentions time, only wrong direction and immediate reaction. I thought he was taking me home. Another quoted statement, no tone, like an obvious truth betrayed. She tried to jump from the car, the only action recorded as survival reflex, and that failure framed by violence, closing this file section without conclusion. Was it from the moment the car turned off the main road that all choices disappeared? Or was there still a fragile moment that passed before the door locked? I closed the file, desk lamp shining on the worn paper edge, and the room sinks into silence again. No apology, no explanation, only the desert direction ahead and a decision already made. The engine sound stops completely when the car halts at Falcon Ridge, a remote and rarely visited place, and that is the last moment Sophia Morales hears the familiar movement rhythm of the world. The door opens, wind blowing through emptiness, no human sound, only dry vastness surrounding. Weak light reflects on cold surfaces, enough to see a body led out of the car, enough to record in the file a stop with no witnesses. Falcon Ridge, the words underlined, no note, as if the name itself says it all. From then on, everything proceeds slowly to terrifying. Julian Thorne spent many hours photographing Sophia Morales in various bound poses, and that prolonged time recorded with emotionless markers, only repetition of action and enveloping silence. In this pitch-black meeting room, I still hear the imagined clock ticking steadily, each minute falling. Stagnant air smell, fabric rubbing skin, victims' interrupted breathing, all emerge through rigid dry lines, needing no additional description yet still chilling the reader. Photographing, the file notes, and no adjective accompanies, as if the act itself is heavy enough. Sophia Morales was held overnight, a long night not broken down in the file, only marked by the phrase, after one night, and in that darkness is continuous assault, placed next to each other like bare facts, no pauses. Could she still count time? Or had all concepts vanished? Julian Thorne did not leave, not hurried. His cold patience shone through staying, continuing acts, continuing photographing, continuing control for many hours, and that repetition creates a cruel rhythm that the file can only record with silence between lines. As night passes, no description of stars or dawn, only the outcome placed neatly. Sophia Morales was killed. This line not bolded, not emphasized. It lies there like an inevitable conclusion after the prior behavioral chain. Did anyone hear anything throughout that night? No answer, because Falcon Ridge is rarely visited, and remoteness repeated as the only explanation. After killing, Julian Thorne discarded the victim's personal items along the highway to mislead investigation. This action recorded with cold precision, not listed, not described each item, only affirming purpose. Mislead. The term appears like indirect admission, and I read it as reading a considered tactic. Those items left along the highway, who would pick them up, who would see, or all swept away by anonymous traffic. In the file, no answer, only the subject's movement from point to point, and trace dispersion placed parallel, with increasing confidence. Julian Thorne began feeling more confident as prior disappearances still not linked by Oak Haven police. And this is the only line about his mental state. No specific emotion described, just an assessment drawn from behavior. That confidence formed from investigative gaps, from cases existing separately, and in those gaps, he acted unhindered. Who missed this connection? And for how long? I wonder that while turning pages back, seeing how time markers stand alone, not touching each other, Sophia Morales just the third target in an unconnected chain, and Falcon Ridge just a map point without warning signs. Disappearances not yet linked. This sentence echoes in my head like a cold reminder of delay consequences. When personal items discarded along highway, they are not just leftovers, but pieces deliberately scattered, distorting the picture. Did that confidence make him more careless, or conversely, more calculating? The file does not answer. It only records that from this point, the subject felt safe in the darkness of separation. I sit here, many years later, only desk lamp shining on old paper stack, and still feel the deadly silence enveloping Falcon Ridge that night, lasting until now. No recorded cries for help, no late witnesses, only a completed behavioral chain and a highway carrying discarded traces. The case closes on paper with similar coldness as it occurred in the field, and the perpetrator's confidence lies there like an unresolved echo. The late-night parking lot, sodium lights casting on cold asphalt, and Isabella Rios walks quickly to her car unaware that is the last moment she still controls her direction. A figure detaches from the darkness, moving decisively, and cold metal of the gun appears before words can form. Get in the car, the short command recorded in the file. No exclamation mark, no tone description. The door opens then slams shut, sound ringing dry in the empty lot. No one turns back. Julian Thorne had attempted to approach Isabella Rios late evening in the parking lot, and from that second, everything occurs in a narrow space, where plastic smell, metal smell, and tense breathing mix together. The subject used a gun to force Isabella Rios into his car. Behavior clearly recorded. No evasion, like a familiar procedure done before. In the cabin, dim dashboard light shines on the victim's face, clearly revealing clenched jaw and eyes not leaving the weapon handle. She's silent in the first minutes, and that silence preserved in the file. No interpretation, no speculation. The car starts moving, wheels rolling on the road, each vibration transmitting to seats like wordless time counting. During movement, Isabella Rios seized the opportunity when the car stopped at a red light to resist, and that moment marked as a rare turning point in the subject's behavioral chain. Red light, light stopping, short pause between movements. How long did she calculate? Arm jerks up, body twists strongly in tight space, and a fierce struggle occurs right in the car cabin between subject and victim. Struggle. This word appears in the file like a solid block. No analysis of who gained advantage. No detailed moves description. Only affirming direct confrontation, close enough for breaths to collide. Sounds ring from inside the car, metal hitting metal, seats shaking, and the car no longer keeps initial quiet. Who heard that sound first? Outside. The world continues, but the car's abnormality begins revealing through uneven movements, through sounds unfit for a car stopped at red light. In the file, no section describes Julian Thorne's emotion then, only action chain interrupted by unexpected resistance. Isabella Rios no longer silent. Her body becomes a disrupting factor in the plan, and the fierceness of the struggle placed next to cabin narrowness, like to things unable to coexist, yet forced to happen. Car shakes, sounds leak out, and that abnormality attracted attention of a nearby patrol unit. That moment recorded coldly, no description of lights or specific sounds, only affirming attention attracted, like an unexpected eye-opening in darkness. If the car did not shake, if no sounds, where would this story have gone? In the following lines, the file maintains neutrality, not continuing what happened after patrol attention. No outcome description, only stopping at the intersection between criminal act and external force appearance. Silence returns on paper, thicker than before, as if the file itself holds breath. I reread this section many times, feeling old paper and faded ink smell, and still clearly sense the compressed tension in each word. Isabella Rios resisted at the red light. That is undeniable fact. And in that fact is a large blank of unrecorded things. What did she think in that second? Or just acted on instinct? How did Julian Thorne react when the plan torn right in the cabin? These questions have no place in the file, and I am not allowed to fill them. Only sounds, struggle, and patrol units' eyes attracted by an abnormal car at night. Everything stops there, like a cut scene, leaving cold echo of an incomplete approach and a moment where silence no longer enough to conceal. The short siren sounds cuts through the cabin chaos, and blue-red lights reflect on glass like a signal ending the out-of-control action chain. The car door burst open, not from inside, but from intervening force hands, and Julian Thorne pulled from the driver's seat in a state no longer able to continue resisting. On the road, patrol lights shine down on scattered items, each carrying separate weight in the file. No prolonged shouting, only short commands and forced compliance. That moment, the Isabella Rios assault scene shifts from chaos to silence abruptly, as if space itself holds breath to remember. Police intervened and restrained Julian Thorne right at the scene. Actions recorded precisely step by step. No emotion, no inference. The subject arrested along with evidence including gun, rope, and a camera containing film, all placed on patrol car hood for inventory under cold light. Hot rubber smell from tires mixes with weapon metal smell, creating the characteristic air of cases ending mid-road. Who was the first to see the film roll in the camera? The file does not specify, only confirming its existence, a detail needing careful preservation. Isabella Rios brought out of the car still conscious, walking slowly but steadily, and transferred directly to hospital with minor injuries. This phrase, repeated many times in the report to emphasize controlled damage level. In the emergency room, under white lights and antiseptic smell, she provided first statement about the stranger, account recorded verbatim. No embellishment, with short sentences, interrupted by still unsteady breathing. I don't know who he is. One sentence quoted in the file. Lying between even lines of the note-taker, Julian Thorne brought to Oak Haven Police Headquarters for questioning about the assault. The transfer occurring in silence, only engine sound and background radio filling the gap. The interrogation room described briefly: metal table, fixed chairs, low-hanging light, and lingering cold coffee smell from previous shift. In that space, the subject sits facing detectives, hands on table, eyes showing little change, and the file stops at this description without trying to explain. Initial questions revolve around the Isabella Rios assault. Event sequence repeated to check consistency, each time marker placed on table like pieces needing to fit. Was he accustomed to answering in patterns? This question does not appear in the report, but procedure repetition makes it hard for readers to ignore that feeling. While one team processes statement and evidence, other detectives begin reviewing area missing persons files, and suspicion forms not from hunch, but from cold data coincidence. The detectives began suspecting the subject linked to recent young model disappearances in the area. This suspicion recorded as an investigative direction, not yet conclusion. The camera containing film becomes a highlight, not because content unseen, but because its presence in the case context. Why a camera appearing with gun and rope? That question hangs between pages. Evidence sealing occurs in the technical room, fluorescent lights reflecting on transparent plastic surfaces, and each seal signed carefully, like a commitment to procedure. In the medical report, Isabella Rios's minor injuries described briefly, no excess details, and conclusion sufficient for additional statement when needed. Calm returns slowly, step by step, in Oak Haven headquarters, but silence after chaos carries different weight. Is this just an isolated assault or the exposure point of a longer chain? No one answers that question now. The detectives cross-reference time, location, and subject, each date a line placed next to each other on the board. No commentary needed. In the dim meeting room, when I reread this file part, page turning sound clearer than usual, and desk lamp shining on familiar keywords: arrest, evidence, statement, suspicion. No climax, no clear ending, only a temporary stop where procedure has fulfilled its role. This case reminds us that timely intervention and procedure adherence can stop an act at the moment it occurs, and from there open the path to trace unexpected clues for the perpetrator. The metal trunk was pulled out from the dark corner of the warehouse with a dry scraping sound. A short noise, but enough to break the thick silence of the search. The lid flipped open under flashlight beams, revealing stacked photo envelopes, paper edges worn from being handled many times. The smell of old photographic chemicals wafted up, mixed with dust and machine oil, the unmistakable scent of a space used for a very specific purpose. No one spoke loudly, only short reminders between detectives as they noted the condition. At that moment, the search warrant for Julian Thorne's apartment and warehouse in Oak Haven was being executed properly, room by room, drawer by drawer. The desk lamp in the apartment shone down on bare walls, and that emptiness turned out to be only the surface. Police conducted the search systematically, marking each area, photographing the scene before touching anything, because every detail could become evidence. In the small apartment used as living quarters, photography technical equipment was discovered early, neatly arranged on the table, cables coiled, lenses cleaned, as if the user was obsessed with controlling images. Was it precisely this neatness that had concealed something for so long? When moving to the warehouse, the space changed markedly: dimmer light, lower temperature, and footsteps echoing on the empty concrete floor. The tool trunk was there, not elaborately locked, as if no further concealment was needed. Inside, hundreds of photos were found, all capturing victims in bound states, different angles, different lighting, but the same intent. The detectives did not comment, only flipped through each one, wearing gloves, placing back in position, and noting the quantity. How much time had passed to accumulate that many images? Among them, photos of Clara Bennett, Eleanor Vance, and Sophia Morales were identified by their relatives later. A confirmation step recorded dryly in the file, but carrying weight needing no explanation. When relatives saw those images, the identification room was silent enough to hear the background air conditioner running, and confirmations recorded only in short sentences, enough for legal understanding. "This is her." One sentence quoted verbatim in the report. No additional description, no comment. Those photos became a cold bridge between disappearance and truth, and precisely what investigation needed, though the cost never calculated in reports. Along with photos, police found a list of addresses and contact information for many other women the subject intended to approach. Names handwritten or printed, arranged in hard-to-predict order. This list placed in separate evidence bag, sealed on site, because it opened a wider investigative scope, though the file at this stage only noted its existence. How many people were listed who never knew they were in his sights? Undeveloped film rolls, also seized, placed in light-proof boxes, each numbered, because procedure did not allow guessing content before examination. The light in the apartment darkroom where developing occurred was checked, and stronger chemical smell confirmed the space's function without explanation. Meanwhile, detectives cross-referenced photo timestamps with known disappearance markers, not letting emotion interfere, because matches or mismatches had to be data-based. Was there any moment in this chain where signs were clear enough to stop earlier? That question not in the file, but present in how pages turned slower at sensitive sections. Photo identification by relatives conducted per standard procedure, with support staff, recording, and signatures, all to ensure unquestionable legality. Photography equipment and film became key evidence, not because they told the story, but because they preserved it unbiased. When I reread this part in the dim meeting room, desk lamp shining on even lines, and paper rustling clearer than usual, or was the room's silence amplifying every sound? The file does not conclude for the reader. It only presents event sequence and evidence, so anyone following sees how truth is peeled layer by layer. The lesson here not in photo quantity or list length, but in how every evidence, no matter how well hidden, leaves traces when procedure followed through. The desk lamp shines directly on the interrogation table, reflecting off face-down photos, white paper edges cold as the room itself. The recording device starting sound rings a dry, steady beat, signaling a long process ahead. Julian Thorne sits opposite, back straight, hands still, no typical restlessness signs. When the first photo flipped over, no one spoke for several seconds, and that very pause became the greatest pressure. Undeniable visual evidence already lay between both sides, needing no interpretation. Before us was a man forced to confront what he left behind, not by accusations, but by images he created himself. Facing that evidence, Julian Thorne began confessing crimes in a clear sequence, as if reading a familiar script, his voice even, not high, not low, and the file notes no significant hesitation when describing luring, capturing, and killing the first 3 victims. "I approached them with work," he said, words transcribed verbatim, no editing. "They believed because I prepared thoroughly. In the room, air thickened, paper smell, plastic from chairs, and breaths of those present mingling, creating heavy stillness." He recounted each step, from building trust to complete control. But the file only kept what necessary for investigation, not excess description. Was this comma cover, or his true state? When asked about locations, Julian Thorne directed police to Mojave Plains and Dust Bowl Canyon, to names repeated many times in reports, tied to specific markers, specific coordinates, enough for field teams to deploy. He did not evade confirming burial sites, pointing with gestures and short words, as if points pre-marked in memory. There, he said, and the statement ended. No further explanation. In prolonged interrogation hours, light unchanged, only pen scratching and recorder background running, steady to the point of ear fatigue. Thorne continued admitting photographing victims gave him power and satisfaction. Confession recorded carefully for psychological and legal meaning. When they were in front of the lens, he said, "Everything was in my hands." That statement placed in quotes in the file. No accompanying comment, letting it expose motive itself. How many times had he repeated that feeling before being stopped? Throughout interrogation, Julian Thorne showed no remorse, noted as observation, not judgment. His face changed little. I steady. And when re-asked for detailed confirmation, he answered consistently, no contradictions, making detectives both cautious and alert. Was this consistency from preparation, or simply living too long with what he did? Questions posed in order, general to specific, to avoid suggestion, and each answer cross-checked with collected evidence. When mentioning Clara Bennett, Eleanor Vance, and Sophia Morales, his voice unchanged, only listing names like event markers, and the file preserved that presentation. One detective read back prior statement, cross-checking details, and Thorne nodded confirmation. No argument. Silence between question rounds prolonged. And in those gaps, air conditioner became the only sound, steady, indifferent. Did victims realize abnormality in the final moment of trust? This question not asked in the room, but hovering over each page when I reread. When location directing ended, interrogation returned to motive, and Julian Thorne repeated photographing was the center of everything, like an axis he did not hide. Not money, he said. The feeling, that statement marked, because it matched what found in apartment and warehouse, forming complete picture from physical evidence to confession, or us cold coincidence of a cornered perpetrator. Many hours passed, lights still unchanged, and fatigue appeared more in interrogators than subject. When recorder stopped, transcript printed, read back, and signed confirmation, everything per procedure, no step missed. How many years from now will these lines be reread? How? I closed the file, feeling its thickness, and know the case lesson not in confession, but in how only when evidence collected and cross-checked undeniable, truth forced to speak, the projector light turns on in the courtroom, silent photos appearing before any words spoken, the gavel strikes short, dry, cutting remaining murmurs in the air. Julian Thorne stands in the center, not bowing head, not seeking other eyes. The file opens, pages turn lightly, old dust smell mixing with polished wood of the court. The trial proceeded at Oak Haven Supreme Court in cold order, per procedure, where every detail must be placed correctly and no word allowed beyond evidence limits. Psychological experts presented evaluations in turn, voices even and neutral, determining Julian Thorne as a psychopath with clear sadistic tendencies. Conclusion read like technical specification more than emotional judgment. No one in the room reacted, only pen scratching and steady breathing of listeners. Can a diagnosis fully explain the behavioral chain brought before justice? When Isabella Rios stepped to the witness stand, light shone on her face. Voice noted as slightly trembling but account clear, recounting horrific moment of restraint by subject, each sentence recorded precisely. No embellishment, no inference. I remember the feeling of not being able to move, she said. Statement quoted verbatim in report, followed by prolonged silence enough for entire courtroom to feel testimony weight. Was that silence speaking more than any question? Lawyers asked within allowed framework, and answers tightly cross-checked with prior collection, ensuring no contradictions. When photos taken by Julian Thorne himself projected as evidence, courtroom atmosphere changed markedly. Public shock felt even in closed space, but procedure continued, not pausing for external reaction. Those images not described in report, only noted as existing and projected, enough to bolster prosecution argument. Who took them, why taken, and what feeling sought through the lens, all clarified in prior stages, and here only confirmation. Psychological experts returned to stand, explaining lack of remorse and control tendency characteristic of this disorder. Their words dry and precise, like reading from research document. Subject shows clear emotional detachment, one expert said, and that recorded without comment. In the room, light unchanged, time seeming longer than usual, and each minute marked by completing another procedural step. Or was this very steadiness what forced everyone to face bare truth? When arguments ended, jury retired, door closed, leaving heavy weight where no one spoke, only light chair shifts and paper rearranging sounds. How long until truth accepted when all evidence before eyes? When jury returned, Foreman stood, voice reading clearly that Julian Thorne guilty of first-degree murder in all three cases, each word pronounced slowly. No emphasis. Death sentence pronounced per legal order. No accompanying comment. And Julian Thorne showed no significant reaction. Noted as final observation in trial section. Another gavel strike. Short and decisive, ending the trial. In that moment, no release. Only feeling that a procedure completed properly. This case, when reread in file, does not ask about perpetrator emotion or public reaction, but emphasizes that from psychological evaluation, witness testimony to evidence projection and jury verdict, every step based on facts and law. How many years pass? The lesson unchanged. Justice not from outrage, but from persistent procedure adherence and letting evidence speak for itself. The iron door closes behind Julian Thorne as he transferred to Haven Point Prison, metal clanging short and dry in the long dim hallway. The sentence effective, and subsequent procedures only matter of time, marked by schedules and signatures. The file notes exact date, time, location. No room for speculation or personal emotion. In the isolation cell, fluorescent light on all night, disinfectant smell mixed with old damp stone walls creating prolonged stillness. No one asked more, and subject did not initiate speech. All interactions recorded per regulation. During wait for execution date, Julian Thorne wrote many letters to his mother, pages thoroughly checked, before leaving isolation, content describing prison life and personal thoughts in even handwriting. I am still fine. One short sentence quoted in file, no further explanation, and showing no remorse. Those letters not considered new evidence, only archived documents, but showing psychological state unchanged from prior evaluations. Was this prolonged silence a choice or inevitable result of a closed process? Defense lawyers continued filing appeals per procedure, each document stamped, dated, and forwarded for review, but all rejected due to determined brutality of cases. No new hearings, no mitigating circumstances accepted, and each rejection notified in short, clear document. During that time, prison space maintained its rhythm, guard footsteps steady by shift, doors opening closing by schedule, and silence returning after each check. Had he grown accustomed to this rhythm, or still counting remaining days? The file records Julian Thorne showed no abnormal behavior throughout execution wait, no additional lawyer requests, no outside messages beyond censored letters. Mornings passed identically, pale light through small window, and speaker announcements by fixed schedule. when execution date set for an early morning the following year. Notification delivered to subject per procedure. No delay or change. All preparation steps listed, checked and confirmed, from participating personnel to used equipment, all to ensure execution per law. In the final waiting room, air cold and metal smell stronger, white light reflecting on electric chair surface, creating indescribable emptiness. No words recorded from Julian Thorne in this moment, and file states clearly that before death, subject made no additional apology or final statement. That silence lasted until procedure began, and subsequent actions recorded by exact time, no accompanying comment, or was saying nothing his final message. When execution completed, doctors confirmed per procedure, and time noted in file as closing marker. No incidents, no last-minute changes, only completed action sequence. Afterward, area cleaned, equipment rechecked, and file supplemented final section before archiving. How many pages written to reach this moment, and how many steps taken to ensure no errors. Looking back at entire process, from detention, appeals to execution, the lesson not in emotion or satisfaction, but in how legal system operates facing most serious cases. Procedure coldness, not lack of humanity, but only way to ensure justice, not swayed by personal emotion. This case ends not with words or remorse, but with all procedures fully executed, reminding that in investigation and trial, accuracy and discipline always decisive factors. The old file folders opened again after the sentence closed, worn edges rustling softly under cold desk lamp. No more defendant to summon. No more interrogation room to prepare. Only archive codes and time stamps. After Julian Thorne's execution day, police work did not stop at a legal period. Workrooms quieter than usual, old paper and ink smell mixing, signaling another investigative phase. The case closed on paper, but its echoes not yet. Detectives began reviewing unsolved cases in Centennial State and Empire State, each file pulled from shelves, placed neatly on tables, and cross-referenced by same standard sequence. No rush, because this work demands absolute patience. Every small detail could be key or just noise. In the process, suspicions emerged that subject possibly linked to at least to other disappearances during his Riverdale time, a period marked by overlapping addresses and dates noteworthy. Were these coincidences enough to form investigative hypothesis? Detectives gathered archived files, comparing Julian Thorne's confirmed methods with old cases, from victim approach to sparse post-scene signs noted in past. This work done in silence, only page turning and pencil noting sounds, desk lamplight creating narrow bright areas on wooden tables. Method has similarities. One file note written briefly, no conclusion, no inference, but how similar enough to pursue further. At that time, lack of DNA evidence major obstacle, leaving many cases at suspicion status, unable to advance in proceedings, samples if any destroyed or degraded, and old reports not meeting modern analysis standards. Had scientific progress come too late for these files? In internal meetings, atmosphere always neutral, no one making claims beyond documents allowed, all opinions noted but not turned into conclusions. One detective reread old witness statement in a disappearance. Voice even, I just saw a man standing nearby. Nothing special. Statement quoted verbatim, then paused. Was that man Julian Thorne, or just a fleeting shadow in faded memory over years? Maps spread out, marking related locations. Riverdale circled in pale red ink, not as accusation, but as point of attention. Each procedural step cross-checked, ensuring no assumption beyond confirmed data. When comparing cases, Detectives noted small method differences, enough to keep linkage hypothesis from crossing suspicion threshold. Did victims realize abnormality before disappearing, or everything too quick to leave clear traces? No one could answer surely, and file allowed no speculation. Late evenings in workrooms, breaths mingling in still air, and desk lamp the only light source, like repeating image from past. Gradually, files closed again, not because solved, but no new data to continue. How many years pass? What do these unsolved cases teach about criminal investigation limits? In summary report, Julian Thorne case mentioned as major lesson for police in identifying and preventing serial killers hiding behind common professions, emphasizing early data connection and interagency importance. No emotional appeals, only dry lines describing procedure and improvement recommendations. When final file folder placed back on shelf, room returned to initial silence, and desk lamp turned off like ending a shift. The lesson remains, not loud, but enough to remind that justice not just closing one case, but not overlooking signs that could save people in the future. If you found this story meaningful and want to continue hearing cases told with deep analysis, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the motivation for me to keep bringing you real stories, life lessons, and journeys in search of justice. Thank you for listening to the end, and I'll see you in the next cases.